You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 165. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. If there was one thing you could change about yourself, about your practice, about your life, what would it be? What kind of an impact would making that transformation have for you? And what do you think it is that's keeping you back from making that change? Today's episode is all about transformation. I'm thrilled to have you here. Thank you for joining me. We are going to do a deep dive into a model that I learned when I first took my coach training, and it's one that I would love to share with you to help you have a framework for the type of transformation that you make, whether it's a personal transformation, a transformation in your practice, or one in your life more generally. Now, the reason I have transformation on my mind is that tomorrow I have the absolute pleasure of hosting my first call with my new group of women lawyers who signed up for the 6-month group coaching and mastermind program that I'm offering. I'm so excited to meet them, and we have the blessing of 6 months to spend together to work on a goal that each of the participants is going to choose for herself in the program. And it has me thinking about transformation. It has me thinking about what you can accomplish over the course of 6 months. And it has me thinking about how I can facilitate and help my new clients effect a transformation that feels meaningful and significant to them, and in a way that they can track that progress for themselves. I recently saw somebody who I haven't seen for many months. I think it's been about 6 months. And that person has lost a significant amount of weight. It's the kind of weight loss where a whole new wardrobe is required. The person looks quite different, and it's quite noticeable for anybody from the outside looking in. It looks very different. And so we were chatting about this transformation and some of the steps that this person took and what it's been like for them over the past few months. And then this person said to me, it's so interesting because I thought I would feel different being here, and yet I don't really feel that different. And that comment really struck me because to me, there are so many differences. And if I look at it from the perspective of a coach, I can start listing out all of the differences that I see, the transformation that I see. But for the person who's in it, who doesn't have the benefit of that third-party perspective, it can sometimes be really hard to see the type of transformation that you are making. And the same can be true for you. You may have made significant progress, a transformation that is foundational, that other people may be able to see in you, but because you're in it and the change is so gradual, you may not see it for yourself. So the reason I'm so interested in sharing today's podcast episode with you is that I think that by sharing a coaching model, you're going to have an additional lens through which you can perceive your own transformation. So with that, I'm going to share the tool with you. Before I do that, what I would love for you to do is to think of an area in your life where you would like to make a change. I would invite you to think about a change that is fairly significant, one that you think would take you approximately 6 months to accomplish, and hold that change in your mind's eye as we go through today's episode. Now, the type of change could be anything from a new job, right? If you're in a job A right now and you want to move into job B, that might be the type of change you're thinking about. It may be a promotion. Maybe there's a role that you're really trying to aspire to. Maybe there is a leadership position that's come up and you want to step into leadership. Maybe you don't want to necessarily change your official title, but you do want to take on more of a leadership role. You may have practice management goals. You may feel like your practice feels quite reactive. Your systems have stopped working for you and you want to revamp those systems. You want to feel back in control of your practice. You may want to improve your communication skills. You might feel like you're not really being as clear as you could be. You're not conveying the type of confidence that you want to convey. It could also be boundaries, that you feel like you're saying yes to everything. You're having a hard time establishing your priorities and saying no to those things that don't align. So there are all sorts of transformations that you may wish to make that you would make over the course of the next 6 months. So once you have identified the transformation that you would like to make, what I would like to do is invite you to apply a model to that transformation. And this is where I'm going to share with you the concept of the triple loop learning model. Now, I went back into one of my old textbooks from my coach training program. It's called Masterful Coaching 3rd edition, written by Robert Hargrove. And he talks about this concept of triple loop learning. And I'll share with you what that is in very high level summary. Single loop learning is your actions. Double loop learning is how you think, and triple loop learning is who you are. And the goal of transformative coaching is to not just work at that single or even the double loop level, but to help my clients transform at that who level, that triple loop learning. So I'm going to give you a little bit more context, a little bit more of an explanation of how that model would operate. And an example that came to mind for me is the goal of becoming a more effective leader. Now, for many of the lawyers that I work with, becoming more of a leader is an aspirational goal. I see this often in senior associates who want to step into the partnership and they see themselves as wanting to become more of a leader within their organization. This extends further once that lawyer becomes partner. And now they're thinking about how they are going to embody the role of partner, how they're going to lead. Sometimes the leadership role is not necessarily in a law firm. So you may be stepping into a role in-house and maybe you start out and you're reporting to others, you're in a larger legal team. And as you move further up into the organization, you may find yourself taking on more of a leadership role. And so the exercise here is thinking about you advancing as a leader and what kind of learning, what kind of loops are you going to be going through in order to affect that transformation into being a leader. So if we look at the single loop level, the action level, you might ask yourself, what would you need to do, right? In order to become an effective leader, what steps would you need to take? And some steps that come to mind for me, well, you would need to take the lead, whatever that would look like for you. It might be putting your name forward for opportunities. It might be proposing ideas. It might be taking on a new project. It might be taking on risks. It might be initiating difficult conversations. It might be seeking input from team members. It might be delegating and managing others. It might be creating opportunities. So there are all these different ways in which you may step into leadership by way of the actions that you take. Now, I'm using the example of leadership, but maybe your goal is to have a more well-managed practice, in which case action steps might be writing out your schedule every week. It might be using your day and planning strategically, using time blocks and monitoring your energy levels. If your goal is to transition jobs, it might be putting together the materials that you need in order to put in an application somewhere. It might be networking. It might be interviewing. So there's lots of different steps that will be associated with your goal. And those, of course, are the single loop action steps. Now, this is often where lawyers will go first when they come to me, right? They want to know what the steps are to do a certain thing. And this will get you a certain way, but it's not going to get you the full way. Now, an example that might resonate is maybe when you were a kid. Now, maybe you never did this, but maybe you did something and it upset your parents. You know, they said, "Oh, Paula, you really should not have budged ahead of your brother." Or maybe you aren't sharing your toys, or maybe something else happened. And so your parents turn to you and they say, "Paula," or whatever your name is, dear listener, "you should apologize. You should apologize to John or to Jane or whoever it is for the thing that you did wrong." And in your eyes, you may think, I really didn't do anything wrong here, but you're not going to let this go until I apologize. And so, okay, parent, I will do the thing that you asked me to do, and I will say sorry. I will say sorry to John or to Joan or to Joe or whoever it is, but you don't really mean it. And if you've parented your own children and you've asked them to say sorry to their brother or sister or whoever it is that they did something that you did not think was acceptable to, then right? The act of saying sorry isn't necessarily truly believing it, truly feeling it, or being sorry. So the actions, the triple or the single loop level, it will make progress, but it's not enough for true transformation. So that's where we get to the second level loop, right? That's where we talk about thinking, the way that you think or the beliefs that you have about your goal. So if we go back to the example of wanting to step into leadership, I would invite you to examine the beliefs and the thoughts that you have in relation to the goal that you have. So for example, if leadership is the goal, you may have thoughts and beliefs that align with leadership for you. Those thoughts might be that you are capable. The thoughts might be you believe in the cause that you would be leading. You connect with the goals of the group. You see yourself as a leader. Your thoughts may be, I believe in my team. It may be, I deserve to lead. So think about what thoughts you have in relation to your goal. If it's practice management, for example, your current goal may be in alignment with that. It may be, I'm really effective at managing my time. I know how to develop systems. There's no hurry here. I know how to get things done. So the idea here is just to simply take that look at the thoughts that you're having about the goal to see whether or not they align with the actions that you'll want to be taking. Now, chances are there are some thoughts that you're having that don't align with the goal. If you already had the thoughts and the beliefs that aligned with the goal, chances are it would be a lot easier for you to be taking those action steps. So again, if you think about what I asked you to do at the very beginning, I asked you to think about a goal that would require a transformation. Often when we pick a goal like that, it's because it's a goal that would be difficult for you. There's some reason why you're not already there. And chances are some of those reasons are related to the way that you're thinking about that goal. So if it's leadership, for example, you might think you're not capable of leadership. Maybe you can't deal with the uncertainty that comes with leadership. Maybe you don't want the responsibility that comes with leadership. Maybe you don't think you inspire the type of confidence that you need to have to be an effective leader. And so when you think of it that way and you start to identify what are some of the thoughts that might hold you back, for example, if it's time management and you keep telling yourself that you're not very good at time management, that it's going to be too hard, that you don't have time to manage your time, or if you're looking at the job market and you're saying, well, these jobs, it's just a bad time in the economy, I'll never get the role that I want, they're never going to hire me, then you start to see how the way that you're thinking about the goal that you have is holding you back, right? It's influencing you. So the transformation then starts with the actions potentially, but it's also about getting to that next layer. It's about looking at the thoughts that you're having and learning to adapt the way you think. Now, this is an area where coaching can be really helpful because sometimes you don't see your own thoughts, right? It's like you say things, you believe them, you see them as true, and yet it sometimes takes the perspective of somebody else. Maybe it's a coach, maybe it's a friend or a mentor, to show you the way that you're thinking, and then you get to reevaluate whether or not the thing that you're thinking is indeed true, if it's helpful, if it's something that you want to continue believing. And that's where we get to the third level, and that is the being level. That is all about who you are being. This is tied in with your self-concept, the way that you see yourself. Using the leadership example, do you see yourself as a leader? I like to think of this as the label that you place on yourself. And as a lawyer, you have a label already. Chances are you went to law school, and so you went from student to law student. That brought you a little bit closer to lawyer. Then you qualify to become a lawyer and you receive that designation, lawyer. You now have that as your title. It has become a part of your identity. As you progress further in your career, it may be that you go from associate to partner. So you've got another title that you can add to the way that you describe to yourself. It's something that gets wrapped up into your identity. And identity is one of those areas where it can be really difficult to shift away from an identity. I see this when I've worked with lawyers who want to transition out of law. I know I struggled with this myself, going from a practicing lawyer to a non-practicing lawyer. That marked a transition for me. It's something that I really had to think about. I had to get used to. And now I still identify myself as a lawyer, but not in the same way as a practicing lawyer. And I've also needed to take on a new identity as coach. And I can tell you at the very beginning, taking on an identity as coach felt very foreign to me, right? People talk about that imposter syndrome, how you feel like you're kind of faking it. I had to go through that stage in order to adopt the new identity, the identity as coach. I remember some of my very first coaching calls and trying to figure out how, as a coach, I would create the container for that conversation, how I would bring in the structure, how I would be the one to lead the conversation. All of that was a shift in identity. And for you as a lawyer, you are also going through these different shifts in terms of your identity. When you decide that you want to be a leader and some of the steps that you're going to need to take, who you are going to be to align with those steps is going to shift. And that's where we have that triple loop learning. You are shifting your identity. And it is a deep transformation. It's the kind of transformation that goes to the core of who you are. And Hargrove, the author of the book I mentioned at the beginning, Masterful Coaching, he has a way of describing it that I think is so powerful. He says, the person who is there now was not there before. The person who was there before does not exist. And so this really captures in my mind the shift, the transformation, that you're no longer who you were before, you are somebody brand new. Now, this whole concept of triple loop learning then, this idea of the actions, the thinking, and the who you are being, these are concepts I've spoken about in the podcast before. I think I may have mentioned triple loop learning in an earlier episode, but not in a recent episode. There are other concepts that I think align quite closely with this model. One of them is the be, do, have model. I believe there's an entire podcast episode that is dedicated to this concept of be, do, have, and we'll link to that in the show notes. I think it's called Be Less, Do More. And the idea here is that often when we have a goal, we think we need to do the things that are required to have the goal in order to be the person that we want to be. So going back to this idea of triple loop learning, we often jump first to that single loop, right? We often jump first to the action, thinking that the actions are where we need to focus our attention in order to get to the B stage, that triple loop learning. And the be, do, have model is switching it around, right? The be, do, have model says what we actually need to focus on first is who we are being. So that's that third loop in Hargrove's model. So when you are thinking about the transformation that you want to make over the course of 6 months, what I would invite you to consider is, who do you need to be? Who do you need to become in order to be that person? And that transformation requires that you adopt new beliefs, new characteristics, a new identity for yourself. And it also means that you let go of an identity that you currently have for yourself. And this can get really tricky because sometimes you look at where you are now and who you have needed to be to get here, and you can see there are so many strategies and beliefs and ways that you identify yourself that have helped you get to where you are. For example, you may be the go-to person, the person that everybody can rely on at any time to do whatever it takes to get the job done. That identity may have served you to get to where you are today. However, if the goal that you have requires you to be a different person, being the go-to may not be, maybe it is, but it may not be part of the identity that is required of that person. So I'd invite you to think about your transformation, about that B-level transformation. What is it that you need to be? Who do you need to be in order to have the transformation that you desire? So have that result. And what action steps, right, what are you doing in that role, right? If you're being that person, what are you doing? So if you're looking at the example of being the go-to. If you're not being the go-to, what does that mean, right? Does that mean that you are delegating more to others? Does it mean that you have created boundaries around your time? Does it mean that you have taken on a different layer of work that you're doing that maybe isn't at the level where people would expect you to be the go-to? So these are all questions that you'll want to ask yourself in that be, do, have model. Now, I would like to point out that the be, do, have model is similar in that it captures the be and it captures the do. It doesn't capture the think, right? So I think if I were to try to align this model more with Hargrove's concept, I would call it the be, think, do, have, right? It's who you are going to be, how you are going to think, and what you are going to do in order to have the result, the transformation that you want. Now, another shorthand model that I've shared before on the podcast is this idea of the who versus the how. So again, you may struggle with a goal or a transformation. And again, often when lawyers come to me with a transition, they will ask me about the steps that are required to get there. And I get it. We all want a formula. We want a test. We want to check the boxes and then get to the result that we seek. And that sometimes works in math. It sometimes works in law. But for personal transformation, sometimes checking the boxes may not be enough to get you to where you want to be. Again, because if it was easy to do those things, if it was easy to check the boxes, then you would already be there, right? If we think about the example of somebody who wants to get really fit, right? Maybe you want to run a marathon and it's easy to print up a schedule off the internet that will tell you exactly the steps that you need to take in order to run that marathon. But if you don't have the desire, the discipline, the belief that this is something that you truly, truly want to do, chances are you're not going to be able to implement. You're not going to be able to act. And this is where the who versus the how comes in. Who do you need to be in order to implement the how? So this comes up, I mentioned, for lawyers who want to transition. And this is really tricky where you may be in a job and you know you want to leave and you know exactly the steps that you need to take. You may have already started taking those steps, and yet you find yourself frozen when it comes to execution. And so looking at that triple loop model or the who versus how model, you want to ask yourself what the gap is, right? Where is the gap in terms of, you know, the actions? What are you thinking and who are you being? What do you believe to be true about yourself that is preventing you from taking steps toward that goal that you have, at least the goal that you think that you want to reach? So we're going to put all of this together. We've covered your goal, right? A few minutes ago, I asked you to think about a goal that you have for yourself, something that you think would take about 6 months. So you've got your goal in mind. You've got a sense of what that looks like. And hopefully you've got a picture in your mind's eye about what transformation would look like for you. We're going to go into that in a bit more detail. And I've offered you this triple loop learning tool, this idea of the actions, the thinking, and the who you need to be for transformation to fully take effect. And when we go back to your goal, what I'm going to invite you to do is to do a very practical and simple exercise that will give you the initial stages of a blueprint to make your transformation. So if you happen to be listening to this podcast and you have access to a pen and paper, great. You can write down some notes as you're listening. If you don't have access, no problem. The exercise, I think, is probably simple enough that you could grab a pen and paper after we're done. You can do this work on your own. Maybe you journal about it. And the idea here is simply to create a model where you walk yourself through the triple loop learning model using the goal that you have for yourself. So a T-bar graph, of course, is you put a T on your paper. And on the left-hand side at the top, I'd invite you to put today's date. For me, it's sometime in July when you listen to this. When this podcast episode comes out, it'll be July 2024. And I'd love for you to put on the second column, heading the second column, 2024 December. So we're forecasting out 6 months. Now, if you happen to be listening at some other time, you can put the math there, the 6-month transformation. Now, you might want to do a shorter transformation, and that is fine too. The idea, though, is that column A is where you are now, and column B is where you want to be. So then we're going to go to that first level, that action level. And I'd invite you to write out all of the actions that you're currently taking that are creating the results in your life. So if you think about, let's say it's leadership, what are the actions that you're taking? It may be actions that you're not taking, right? You're not putting yourself forward for new opportunities. You are not asking for the lead. You are not taking responsibility, or maybe it's other things, right? You're acting in a way that doesn't necessarily inspire the confidence that you want to inspire. Now, this is not to say that because you're not leading, you're not inspiring confidence. I'm just trying to think of examples or ways that the things you're currently doing may be not in alignment with the goal that you're seeking to reach. So if we use time management, for example, you may find that right now you're not creating a calendar system. You're not scheduling your days productively. You're not setting aside time for deep work. You're not setting boundaries around your time. You're not identifying the priorities in any given day. So you look at the actions that you're taking now and you put those in that left-hand side of the column. Then I invite you to think about on that other side, the 2024 December version, whatever time frame it is, where you've reached the goal. You've effected the transformation. What actions are you taking there, right? If it's scheduling or if it's time management, you're having a weekly date with yourself where you're planning your week. You're creating your schedule every morning in a way that is efficient and ensures you manage to get your priorities done on time. You have tools that you are using to manage procrastination. So you're thinking about that second column. If it's leadership that you're looking toward, it is you are delegating effectively, you're identifying the goals for you and your team, you're taking responsibility, you're initiating important and potentially difficult conversations. So you just want to have the goal on the right-hand side, the actions that you're going to take. That's the first part. So the second part is, again, using the goal that you have for yourself is to go through the thoughts and the beliefs. So here, same exercise. I'd invite you to write down the thoughts and beliefs that you have currently that are keeping you where you are. And these may be thoughts and beliefs that have been really helpful, right? I need to work really hard to succeed. That might be a belief that has been helping you, that has helped you get to the level that you're at right now. But is working harder going to help you achieve the leadership goals that you have? Maybe yes, and maybe there are other skills that you may need to develop that will make you a more effective leader, right? The ability to delegate, the ability to manage. Control may have been one of those skills that has allowed you to get to the place where you are currently. And to step into that leadership role, control may be one of those things that you need to let go. So here, the idea is to identify some of the thoughts that you're having, right? The thought may have been, I need to control all of this. And the new thought may be, I need to learn how to let others control themselves. Something like that. So you want to think about what you need to believe, what you need to think in the future in order to effect that transformation that you desire. Then, of course, we get to that third level, that triple loop learning. Who are you being now? What labels have you attached to yourself? And what labels do you want to attach to yourself in the future in order to reach and be at that goal? So, in summary, we have reviewed a model designed to help you identify different layers at which you can transform. And what I hope is that by having this model in mind, you're able to break down your transformation into discrete areas and you can see where you are now versus where you are in the future. And if you write out this T-bar graph, as we've discussed, and store it away somewhere, I'd invite you to come back to it in a few months' time and see just how much progress you have made in relation to your goal. So this will allow you, having a framework will allow you to evaluate your progress and measure yourself so that you don't find yourself at the end of your journey having transformed without really being able to appreciate just how much has changed, right? Going back to that weight loss example. Other people may see it on the outside, and we want you to be able to see it for yourself. Now, when you set a goal for yourself, one of these transformational goals that's going to require that you change, you're going to face challenges. And the beauty about these challenges is that they are going to reveal the places where you require the most transformation. So I've recorded podcast episodes about SMART goals versus stretch goals. So the key idea there is that SMART goals are effective goals, right? They allow you to break down your goals into different categories: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound. You've got your SMART goal set up, and typically these goals are ones that you can achieve. The SMART structure of it is what gives you the structure. It's what keeps you going forward toward your goal, versus a stretch goal, which is different in concept in that the stretch goal isn't so much one that you see as being achievable. Some people will describe it as an impossible goal. And the idea there, or a big audacious goal, I've heard that term as well, that goal is so big, so beyond where you are currently, that it requires you to approach it with a completely new way of thinking. And it requires you to transform into a completely different person in order to attain the goal. So here, when we're thinking about your transformation over the course of 6 months, we're likely looking at a combination of SMART goals and stretch goals, with the idea being that at the end of 6 months, you yourself have transformed. So we go back to this idea that Hargrove shared. The person who is there now was not there before. The person who is there before does not exist, right? It's this fascinating concept of transformation. And it aligns beautifully with the notion of death and rebirth. And I say beautifully, and then I realize death and rebirth may not sound so beautiful, but in this transition model that has been offered by Martha Beck, I've talked about it in the podcast episode about transitions for lawyers, so you're welcome to go back and listen to that episode as well. She talks about the first stage of transition as being that death and rebirth. It's typically brought on by a cataclysmic event, like a job loss or a job change or something exciting that happens that throws you into this new space where you're basically reinventing yourself. You're having to reestablish, you're trying to rediscover who you are. And then you go into the other stages of the cycle, dreaming and scheming, testing and trying, until finally you find your way to the promised land. So here, when you're thinking about your transformation, there is that element of death and rebirth. And those challenges, the challenges that come up for you that you're going to need to overcome, are going to require that you transform yourself. And finally, what I'd love to offer here is that the goal is for each of you to target the 3 levels of transformation when it comes to your goals. So just to back up and look at those 3 categories, we're going to take the actions. Some of the actions you'll typically take, you're going to commit to the outcome. You'll make a plan for the outcome, and then you're going to execute on your plan. Then you're going to need to deal with the thoughts that come up. So I mentioned obstacles just a moment ago. Your thoughts may be some of your biggest obstacles. Some common ones that I hear: I want to give up. This is taking too long. I don't have the time. This doesn't seem that important. This isn't for me. I don't see the point. So there are all of these thoughts that are going to be offered to you. You will offer yourself these thoughts in the middle of the night or whenever it happens to be, when you're feeling a bit discouraged. And your job then becomes finding a way to manage these thoughts, to create new thoughts and new beliefs that align with the goal that you have for yourself. And that brings us to that 3rd level, which is becoming the person who is aligned with having reached the goal. So who is that person? That is the person who never gives up, the person who will give the project as long as it takes. You may not see the point currently, but you know, you have confidence that it will be clear to you in time. You were made for this. You're the kind of person who makes the time. You are the kind of person who knows and decides what is important. So, my friend, I hope this episode has helped you to give a framework to the transformation that you want to make over the next 6 months. I hope you have done that exercise so that you've got a little takeaway keepsake that you can refer back to in a few months' time when you've gone ahead and done the thing that you so badly want to do. And I want to thank you again for joining me. It's been a pleasure to speak with you again this week. And if you want any help in bringing life to that transformation, if you want my support, you absolutely know where to find me. So thank you again. I am excited to reconnect with you again next week, and I wish you every success in whatever transformation it is that you choose. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.